Well, hello, and I hope you've been enjoying what you've seen so far from session 3 of our First Communion programme. You've been talking about and looking at the idea of gifts. And of course, this is to reflect on that part of the Mass where we have the offertory or the preparation of the gifts, where we bring up our gifts to the Lord, the gifts of money and bread and wine, so that the bread and wine are taken from our gifts. And of course the priest remembers the words that Jesus said on the Last Supper, and as that happens, the bread and wine become the body and blood of Jesus. We give our gifts to God from the gifts that God has given to us. And then God gives them back again, not just as what we give, but transformed into his very self, into Jesus' body and blood. So these gifts are very important. And it's important that it's part of our gift as well, our giving of ourselves. In fact, from the very beginning, this was part of how people celebrated Mass, celebrated the Eucharist. There's a writer writes in the 2nd century describing how people brought gifts up. Now in those days it wasn't just bread and wine, but it was all sorts of produce, goods from the fields and the farms. And those things were there to support the church and especially to give to the poor. And it says from those things the priest takes bread and wine for the Eucharist. Now, these days, we don't bring up a load of produce except perhaps a harvest festival, but we bring up money, which the church can use in the same way to support the work of the church and to support the poor. So the bringing up of the offering of our money and of ourselves and our talents and our gifts is part of the Mass. But I thought I'd also explain something to you about the specific things that we use at this point in the Mass. I brought along some of the bits and pieces with me. They're here on the right. We have this cup here, which is called a chalice. That's just a fancy word for cup. We have a dish here, which is known as a ciborium. The first letters of that are C-I-B-O. And if you've got Italian relatives or friends, they'd recognise straight away the word cibo, which means food, and it's simply a dish with food in it. And we have this bread. Now, I know it doesn't look a lot like bread, I mean, you know that anyway, but it is bread. It's simple unleavened bread made just with flour and water. And if later on, there's a video also on the, which you've got a link to, and there's a link also on the web page, showing some nuns who are making this bread for people to use in the Mass. And the nuns actually made the video for a different group of First Holy Communion children to explain all about that. We also have a little cruet with a bit of wine in it. I don't need very much wine. At the moment, because of the COVID-19, we're not giving out the precious blood. It becomes the precious blood once the priest has said the words over it to the congregation, just Jesus in the form of bread, the sacred host here. So I've only got a little bit here because that's all I need for just me. So these are all the things that we use for celebrating the Eucharist. But if you want to find out more, certainly about the bread that is made for the Eucharist, then do go to that video. I've shown it in years past to other groups, and they found it very interesting. Oh, and what's this bowl for? There's a bowl of water here. You may notice that some Mass I wash my hands, not for 20 seconds, because this is only a symbolic washing. If I need to clean my hands properly, I actually have some hand sanitizer behind me. But when in the early church, the people used to bring up the food and bring up all different produce, and the priest would receive it. He'd receive it all, and they'd be handed on to others to put around, but he'd get dirty hands. So before he celebrated the Mass, he would wash his hands. Now, my hands aren't dirty when I celebrate Mass, but it reminds us also that we need to cleanse ourselves not just outside, but also inside. And it says, wash me from my iniquities. If I funny word that, and cleanse me from my sins. Iniquities is just another word for things that we do wrong, things that are literally, the word iniquity actually means things that are dirty, but not dirty physically, but things that mark us, that spoil us. We ask God to purify us from those things as we come together to celebrate the Eucharist, to celebrate the great thing that Jesus did for us. So I hope you've enjoyed the session so far and carry on enjoying the session. I hope you watched that video by the nuns, and I'll speak to you again next week. God bless you all.